Alright, so we are going to be going over assembly and placement of a Tofflemire matrix band. First, we're going to need our devices, which to start, we're going to need the appropriate amount of wedges, depending on what size of wedge you may need or how many is determined by the tooth. Next one you're going to need is a matrix band. There are many different sizes and assemblies to these matrix bands. And we are going to be using a Tofflemire retainer to hold the matrix band for placement. Looking at our tray, we are going to need those three items that we were talking about. So our wedges, retainer, and our matrix band. We're also going to need our simple basic setup such as our mouth mirror, explorer, cotton plier, and also a couple of accessories such as our ball burnisher and our hemostat if wedge removal is needed. The hemostat is useful if the wedge is putting up a fight on removal, so it's real helpful to have that if the time comes. Now, just to show a quick example of being able to assemble a Tofflemire retainer and band together, we're just going to do a quick example and go over different parts of assembly. So now that we've seen how it's been assembled, we're going to look over the different parts of a Tofflemire retainer so we can use it to help matrix the tooth and in the proper place that it is being matrixed at. So looking at the top right here, we have the head part which has slotted guides. It has more of a U shape to it, and that's going to help us find for which quadrant of the arch we're going to need to point this to and have the band on whichever guided side, which is left or right, and sometimes for some reason straight through the middle. But this is the guided slots that we're going to be using, left and right. And let's look at the part that's going to be underneath it, which is a sliding body. It's more of a square shape with a diagonal slot in there. This is going to be helpful for our band. When we place it, it is placed into that guided slot, and it is secured with one of these knobs that are down here. You have our spindle. The spindle is changed by using our larger knob, the inner knob. When it is moved, it changes the position of that square, the sliding body, to make it either a larger circumference of the band or a smaller circumference of the band, which will help us tighten it around the tooth or loosen it to take off or put onto the tooth. Going further down from there, we learned about this inner knob. Now we're going to learn about the outer knob. This is specifically for securing the matrix band when it is placed into this sliding body and put to whichever side of this sliding guide. So now that we know a little bit about our assembly piece, let's look at our band. Our band is going to come with either a universal mold where it's just a almost smile-like shape. Some bands may have two humps symmetrically on each side that are useful when we have tooth decay that has gone deep towards the root into the sulcus, and we need more of an extension of this band to follow it. With this one, when I assemble it, I like holding it in a smile-like position, kind of like a U shape, and alongside that having my retainer in that smile-like position, that U shape, and keeping them both the same. When I go to assemble it, I like folding my band into itself, still in that same position, still having that U shape. I'm going to find the sliding body with the slot that I'm going to place it in. Place it into that slot first. Helps get that guiding Now I'm going to determine what side of this slot that I'm going to face it towards, which is usually determined by the tooth that we are working on. So to the right side or to the left side. For example, I'm just going to put it to the right. So going and putting it into the guide slots, I'm just put it right through the middle. Just going to lift it up with my thumb pressing down where I pushed it in at first. Up and over to the right side. Up and over to the opposite side if I need that. A quick, easy change that we're able to use. Now going back over here to this sliding body, we see a little bit of a tail sticking out right there. The main thing that we want to make sure is that that tail is equal from both sides of the band. Both sides of the band should be equal when we get there. I'm just going to push it through just to ensure that I have both sides being equal. I look and I see that I have a shorter end right here and a longer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold my band and I'm just going to push it so that they're both equal. At which point, once I get there, I just push it in just a little bit, leaving a little bit of a tail. Hold that sliding body with my thumb, and I'm going to use my outer knob to lock that band. Hold this inner knob with one other finger so that the body doesn't slide while you turn this knob to secure it. Having a nice secure lock ensures that when I just pull on this band, it doesn't come sliding out, ensuring that when it is being tightened by the assistant or the doctor, it doesn't come off of the tooth when we are trying to secure it onto the tooth. Some doctors or assistants might want the band to be burnished, or if it has any creases or crinkles into it, it's nice to burnish it. You can use a mixing pad and with a good amount of force, push down with the back end of a mouth mirror to help round out your matrix band. Okay, so now we're going to identify our tooth and how many wedges that we are going to need. So going over here and looking at my lower arch where I have my blue tooth that has been prepared, I look inside to see that it has one surface of the inner proximal portions that's included in this filling. So where there's a missing wall, as we see right here on this mesial portion, that's where our matrix band is going to perform its main duty. So we are going to need one wedge for this interproximal wall that's missing to be repaired. So taking our Tofflemire matrix that we assembled from before, usually, as I mentioned, that there's a U shape to it, you can consider those as feet. And when we go to our mouth, wherever it's going to be placed, you can consider the gingiva as the ground. So we'd always want our feet, which are just two parts of this point, to be put on the ground. Now, taking that means I have to flip this U shape over to the bottom. And if I was to go look over here and try to place it on my tooth, the band is actually facing the wrong way. The reason why it's facing the wrong way is because our matrix retainer should always be on the buccal side of our tooth. So if it's not facing the right direction, because we are on the buccal side, we're going to change that band over to the opposite end. So just as we discussed before on how to assemble it, we're just going to change it over. We need to first, for one, unlock with the outer knob so we can rotate our band. Hold on to the band part where we inserted it at the sliding body, pull it up from one side and transfer it to the other. Go back, lock with the outer knob. And now we have our band on the correct side for when we place it to a tooth. Retainer's on the buccal. The band is now facing towards that tooth. We can now use this Tofflemire correctly. If needed, you need to use the inner knob to expand the band. If I was to tighten the inner knob by turning it to the right, my band size is going to shrink as I continue to tighten. So to first get it on the tooth, we need to have it large enough that it will fit on the tooth. Going and placing, usually it's nice to start with one cusp or one side of the tooth at a time. I'm going to take my band, I'm going to push down on it with my finger to expand it a little bit. Instead of it making it real narrow, it's going to expand it into more of a circle or a square. And we're going to fit it over one side. I have it over the buccal, and I'm going to negotiate it to go over the lingual side. At which point I want to center the head of my Tofflemire retainer right to the middle of the tooth. Once I have it secured right there and it's in place, I'm going to take my inner knob, which changes the circumference of the band, and I'm going to turn it to the right to tighten the band around the tooth. That will help secure my band onto that tooth. You'll feel resistance at one point. You don't want to over tighten it. We want to tighten it enough where if I was to try and move this band, there's not a lot of play to it, that it holds its spot and doesn't rotate around the tooth when I move it. Have it nice and secure. And I'm now going to look at the floor of my preparation. So where the deepest part of that interproximal portion is, I'm going to check and see if I have any gingival tissue or if there's a black line showing between the tooth and the band to ensure that I have the band all the way down. You can use your mouth mirror to check. You can also use your explorer to explore and check that bottom of that connection between that band and that preparation of the tooth. Once it has been confirmed that everything has been properly seated and the band is all the way past that margin of the prep, I'm going to use a wedge to secure my band into place. Using my wedge, you're going to have a pointed side and you're going to have a square side, and those all are going to determine where this is going to be placed. Now, on that wedge, you're going to have more of a pyramid shape to some. This is a wooden wedge. You may be dealing with plastic, but with that wooden wedge, I'm going to use the pointed area and the tip top of that triangle that it creates, and I'm going to have that top portion, that's the top of the triangle, going up towards the occlusal of the tooth, and the bottom part, which is the flat area of the triangle, going towards the gingiva. So using that, I had my missing wall on the mesial. I'm going to come in from the lingual side of my tooth. I'm going to place my wedge. Sometimes teeth may be a little tough to spread apart with the wedges, so a little bit of force is used. You can use the back of your cotton pliers, flip it over, and help insert that wedge into the interproximals of the teeth. Take another look at your matrix band. Make sure that everything was secured, nothing was displaced. Now that you have that confirmed, what you're going to do is go to your ball burnisher that has the rounded end. Some people may use other instruments, but the main thing we need to do is burnish the contact. We need to use our burnisher to rub against the opposing or the adjacent tooth that's right next to it. I'm going to use a good amount of force to help rub that band to help keep in contact with that tooth that's over next door to it. This is just the mesial portion. If you had both interproximals involved, then you would do it to every single interproximal area. Once I have that, I'm always going to go back and reconfirm, did anything mess up on my placement? Now that it is complete, it goes on to the next step of placing the full restoration, or maybe placing liners, bases, or bonding systems for the next portion of this procedure. All right. Once our procedure has been complete, we're going to have to do the removal of our matrix band. You would assume that it's just the reverse process of everything that we did to place it, and it can be. But there's a little bit of an easier way to do it without possibly affecting our restoration if our restoration still has time to set up, as do amalgam fillings or temporary placements of IRMs or CAVIT that may be needed. So to help not distort our fillings, I'm going to take a look at my retainer. I'm going to start by removing this full retainer but leaving the band in place. I'm going to take my outer knob and I'm going to rotate that to loosen and unsecure the band. Once I've unsecured it, I can pull the retainer straight out, place it off onto my tray, and now my retainer or my band has been separated and can be removed gently by the operator. I'm going to take my cotton pliers and try to get this wedge out. Some of them may be really locked in there, but I'm going to get that, place it on my tray, and I'm going to gently remove my band around or out of my interproximals, taking more care on the interproximal that we had to replace or repair. So because I'm dealing with my mesial, I'm just going to take it out of the distal first, and at which point I can gently pull up and remove my mesial aspect of the band. Usually at which point the doctor or the assistant will be able to have vision of the interproximal portions where cleanup of any flash or overhangs can be handled at that point. It's very important to recall how many wedges were placed and that the removal of all wedges was commenced. In my experience, most of the time it never is an issue to get these out, but some doctors may need a thicker wedge for placement and they have to bury it deep into the interproximals, and sometimes they may break off and hide in that interproximal area. We need to make sure that we can calculate that all of our wedges that we placed all came back out in full context, or in how the full, let's see, in completion. So going into there, if I did have one that broke on me, or if I need to take one out with a little bit more gripping force, I can use a curved hemostat end and lock down onto my wedge and be able to take it out. But if some are broken in there, you may need the assistance of the doctor if they are still there, or a special instrument that has it more of a curve to it that can feed itself into the interproximal and hook onto that wedge and gently encourage it to come out. Good pigtail scaling instruments can be used, or a interproximal curved carver or amalgams can be used. In certain cases where a wedge has been left behind, I have had the experience of having a wedge left into the interproximal portions of my teeth after a filling, and 2 to 3 days later I kept feeling a sharp piece between my gums and I could not identify what it is until I went in there, looked at the mirror, and was able to pull out half of a wedge that was left behind from that dental visit. So it's important to take it out. My experience, thankfully, it did come out and didn't cause too much of a irritation or a bad result for the filling, but they should all be accounted for. So sometimes in the midst of everything, you might come across, I have a Tofflemire band and it's all crinkled and folded. Should I get a new one? Well, in practice, if you're trying to just get the hang of assembling them, you don't have to throw this one away. I mean, if it was used on a patient, absolutely. You do not want to reuse these for other patients. But I can see that there's a little bit of damage that was done to it. A little bit of burnishing was happened in between this part. So what I'm going to do is just take my mixing pad, the band held down, and the back of my mouth mirror, and I'm just going to smooth this band out to get it back to its older shape. So we can use it for practice if that's what you're trying to learn and get the hang of. Not as crinkled, but I can still use it again for my practice assemblies.